Bragonier was diagnosed with dyslexia as a child. He faced academic obstacles in school and was perceived by others as different. His dyslexia inspired him to look deeper into the neuroscience of the disorder and the psychological, social, and emotional impact associated. After reading The Dyslexic Advantage by neuroscientists Fernet and Brock-Eide, Dean set out to do further research on the topic. In 2015, Dean founded NoticeAbility, where he developed, with the help of Harvard Business School and the Harvard School of Education, a curriculum for educators to better serve and uplift the dyslexic community. Dean is now a father to a son with dyslexia. What was your experience like growing up with dyslexia and now as an adult with dyslexia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, early on, especially when I was, being introduced to the challenges of learning how to read, I felt that, even though I had the benefit of an early diagnosis and I had parents who were able to explain to me what dyslexia was and that it wasn't an indication of my intelligence, it still felt like it was a commentary on my self-worth and the fact that I had a difficulty learning to do something that everyone else could do effortlessly really made me question their explanation that it didn't mean I was stupid. I mean, I concluded that I was stupid. I mean, it's, our parents, for the most part, are very encouraging, and they will say things to keep our spirits up. But I think sometimes we question whether or not they're being authentic, right? And so when you go to school every day, or as I did, and I witnessed that level of failure that I was experiencing, I kind of questioned whether or not they were actually telling me the truth, because I sure felt stupid. That was a very clear and vivid experience that I can remember to this day. I was able to get sufficient reading remediation allowed me to address at least the logistical challenges of digesting text, right? I was able to start to sort of unpack, that process, but it didn't all of a sudden mean that just because I could read competently that I was a confident reader. I was not. I was always struggling, the easy things to miss when you're dealing with a question where it says all of the following are true except, and you just missed the word except, and then you answer the question completely wrong because you missed the word except or not or something like that. These things that would sort of haunt me in testing scenarios, and there was always the issue of how quickly I could do things. If the assignment in a class was, okay, everybody, read the first 10 pages and then look up when you're done. Well, I was never going to look up, right? I mean, the class would end before I would be finished. And so, you start to masquerade, you start to try to pretend and appear normal when you feel everything but. And, I think that I decided, I don't think it was a moment that I decided, but I realized that for me, the one thing I could control once I got home and I was out of the eye shot of my peers, I could literally just pour hours and hours and hours into schoolwork, and I could get what I needed to get done in order to then perform as I wanted to on my scores. I spent countless hours, trying to control how much I could ingest content wise, so that I could perform well. Now, luckily, I was able to do pretty well academically because I was willing to have nothing but work be, sort of the content of my life. As an adult, however, and having gotten into a good college and graduated from a good college as an adult in the workplace, some of these challenges still follow me. My inbox is a mess, right? I've just got so many emails, and no matter what I do, I'm still not caught up with them. But that work ethic that I cultivated from all those years in school has allowed me to, look at the hard work of a social entrepreneur and say, well, this is pretty normal for me. This isn't, this isn't more demanding than being a sixth grader. I mean, this is the same amount of workload. And furthermore, I am now very aware of not only the fact that dyslexia is not an indication of my intelligence, but that dyslexia actually carries with it certain advantages that I can channel that make me a very competitive professional. And, one of the things that I'm teaching my son, who's 12, about to be 13, is that I've figured out a way after all these decades of working incredibly hard for short durations and getting as much done as neurotypical people would get accomplished in an 8-hour day. And so at the end of the journey, I mean, I don't want to say this is the end of the journey, but as a 47-year-old, I have learned to harness all of the harness all of the challenges of my youth and as a student, and channel it into being a more productive and efficient adult in the workplace. So, the story ends well, right? The story of all that hard work pays dividends in the long run. The challenge is, can you remember that when you're having to go through it?
Of course. No, absolutely. I mean, I can totally relate. And I'm sure, obviously, as you're experiencing with your son, like, growing up, it's the challenges are always very visible. They're very, they're hard to, obviously they're challenges, but, they're hard to manage. And then, as you grow up, even though the challenge, quote unquote, or the diagnosis, dyslexia, reading difficulties, ADHD, whatever the learning or, challenges, it levels out. And you can learn how to be successful despite these obstacles.
That's a really good point. I've never thought leveling out. I really like that. I mean, it's sort of like this graph, right? Where it's like incredibly steep in the beginning of the amount of demands and stress and everything, and then it kind of levels out, and then all of a sudden, I would argue that that you go from being in this negative deficit, you sort of plateau where you're able to be as productive as your peers. And then all of a sudden you start going up in terms of productivity as a result of all of this challenge that you did in the beginning. And you wind up, I think, probably in the end run, being a more resilient, more hardworking, more tenacious professional at whatever you pursue, because you've had that experience all along. But I love that, leveling out. That's a good term.
Yeah, no, thank you. You started NoticeAbility, which is an organization dedicated to unlocking the dyslexic experience. Can you tell us a little bit about, or tell us a little bit more about NoticeAbility and what you guys do?
Absolutely. The experience for most dyslexic students is similar to what I described from my own experience. And what frustrates me in hindsight is looking at the fact that very rarely are students with dyslexia exposed to these advantages that accompany our dyslexia. We're just made painfully aware of what we do badly, but very rarely do we get a glimpse into what we do well. The neuroscience that is now emerging shows that there are these advantages associated with dyslexia and our perception, as well as obviously our strong work ethic. And so my belief was that if we could take the best practices of special education, the emerging neuroscience around the dyslexic advantage, and lastly, those professions where we see a disproportionate number of people with dyslexia succeeding.
Mm-hmm.
What we can do is we can blend those three things into curriculum for middle school students so that they can start to see what they're good at. They can start to contextualize the disciplines of education because they now have exposure to some of the professions that we do well in. And then lastly, we teach within the content of that curriculum social emotional learning. How do you start to self-regulate in team-based environments? How do you start to identify ways to negotiate and resolve conflict in a productive way? These are the things that we as adults need, but certainly if we had been given those tools younger in our lives, earlier in our lives, we would have been able to perhaps navigate some of the social challenges in our youth. And so what we do is we produce 3 different curricula that focus on the 4 top professions for dyslexics that we have chosen, which is entrepreneurship, engineering, architecture, and the arts. And so we've created content with the help of Harvard University, and we distribute that content to schools around the world who then empower students with dyslexia through this strength-based approach, as opposed to simply looking at these kids as the struggling readers, the problem, the behavioral problem kids, which is often a manifestation of frustration in the classroom.
Absolutely. So can you get, and I know you had mentioned, and it's on your website as well. So you guys work with Harvard University School of Business as well as the School of Education. But in terms of these curricula, what do these curricula consist of in order to help with the social emotional growth? For instance, like what are the specifics, quote unquote?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. No, very rarely do people really focus on logistics. Each one of our courses is 20 hours long, and it's divided into 2 parts. The first part is the content, right? What is entrepreneurship? How do you build a business plan? How do you make a business presentation? All of that is housed on an online learning platform where I am teaching, and most specifically, I can use different modalities of teaching that the dyslexic learner prefers, meaning graphs and pictorial imagery, or use the spoken word, as opposed to burying all that information behind text, right? So students are able to self-pace their learning by watching those videos online, but the social and emotional component comes when they work in groups in the classroom. We're now doing a COVID pandemic related version where we're doing them in Zoom classrooms. But the idea is that we remove the teacher from what's referred to as the sage on the stage, kind of preaching at the students, and move the facilitator into an ancillary supportive role and encourage the kids to actually work through their business, for example, and the disagreements that come from that, and starting to identify what each other does well. So if you've got 3 or 4 kids working in an environment where the teacher is off to the side, they're starting to recognize within each other what they're good at. They're going to have conflict, which we actually know and expect and want, because then they can use conflict resolution, start to exercise some of those social emotional learning skills that we're teaching them. But more importantly, what they're starting to see is irrefutable evidence of the fact that their dyslexia provides them with some keen, innovative insights. And once they can experience, whoa, you mean not everybody can do this? Not everybody sees the world this way? No, your dyslexia allows you to see the world this way. And then they start to generate a positive, perhaps not an entirely positive interpretation of dyslexia, but a more balanced interpretation. Yeah, it's got its struggles, but it's also got its unique strength. And that is a more even-keeled approach to something that a person with dyslexia is going to live with their entire life.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's it.
so you're creating a more positive experience for individuals, specifically students, who are growing up in school and dealing with all these challenges, to gain a perspective on, and to not basically harness on the difficulties, but it's a unique ability to have dyslexia. I mean, and we all have challenges and we're all unique in so many different ways. But I do think the social and emotional component of any learning disability is definitely the biggest part, because, as we all know, socially and academically, it all, and emotionally, but it all coincides with one another.
But,
And
that's another really keen insight that you just made, which, believe it or not, I would say that 98% of the people in the field of dyslexia don't understand what you just said. What they are focused on exclusively is, can you get dyslexic students to learn how to read? And there is this assumption that if they can learn how to read, they will automatically be successful human beings.
mm-hmm.
That's not true. That, just as you just said, you're neglecting the whole social and psychological impact of being a person with a learning difference. That is extremely important. And if you don't feel positive about yourself, if you don't learn to foster a genuine sense of self, and bolster your self-esteem, I don't care how strong a reader you are, you're going to walk around feeling insufficient. And why do I know that? Because I've lived it.
Of course, absolutely.
So,
it's very interesting, and I am the first person to say that. And it's so interesting, because I deal with some bouts of anxiety and depression, and I just went through a bout of it, and it's just interesting because I posted on my Facebook, and I believe this in terms of learning challenges and any type of challenge, but unless you're an individual who's dealing with the difficulty or the disorder, or you're a professional who knows about the disorder, studies it, treats it and all of that, not a lot of people understand what it's like to be the individual with the difference. And it's frustrating. And it's something that I really do wish across all levels, not just academically, so all levels, that people would learn more about.
you brought up again a really important point, which is that, I'm not suggesting that there is an equivalent in what I'm about to say, but I am a white male. Okay. I am keenly aware of Black Lives Matter, and part of the effort is to remove blind spots that I may have in order to understand the challenges that the African American community and people of color have dealt with in the United States. The motivation, I think, is to allow those who may not face those challenges to cultivate a healthy sense of empathy and understanding of what the experience is like for those individuals who have been marginalized. And what you just said is exactly the same. Is, I don't expect a person who is not dyslexic to understand what it's like to be dyslexic. However, if they can understand my experience from me sharing it, and they can cultivate a sense of empathy and compassion, there is a point where we all start to realize we have a unique experience. We all have shared struggle, and we can start to identify that my struggle, your struggle, an African American struggle may be different, but we all have struggles, and that generates understanding and empathy. And I think we need a lot more of that.
Yeah.
Especially right now.
Yeah, and I think there is more of that slowly coming into way. with this pandemic. I think there's a little bit more compassion and empathy, and people are realizing what they used to take for granted, they shouldn't be taking for granted whatsoever. Because really now is when you realize what's really important in life, or we hope, and so forth. In terms of these curricula and all the different programs that you offer, how do you, I don't want to say necessarily publicize, but like what schools and teachers and other programs take, obviously use your services?
Sure. We work with a lot of private schools that focus on learning differences.
Okay.
We have a lot of homeschoolers who use our content. Our primary focus, however, is getting our content into public schools, because a vast majority of dyslexics will be educated in public education systems.
Right.
So that's our primary focus. Now, one of the interesting things that has happened as a result of the pandemic is that, as I said, we normally would have other teachers facilitating our courses in their classrooms. What we've now done, because schools have been closed, is we have opened up remote learning where we can bring students, and we literally have brought students from all over the world into this remote learning environment, where we have volunteer facilitators who have a 1-to-4 ratio, 1 facilitator to 4 students ratio, so they get that high intensity support, but the students are able to then have that social connection and work on these projects together. So what we've now seen is a sort of a democratization of empowerment, because we're able to circumvent a school and go directly to a family. And so I'm very, very proud to say, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but of the last the 4 cohorts that we've done, we've had perhaps roughly 30% public school, 30% private school, and about 40% homeschoolers. So you bring all of those different individuals together, and because all of a sudden Zoom is just the square, right? It doesn't matter what car a family has in the driveway, or, you're erasing those social distinctions, and the kids are coming together and communicating and connecting on the fact that they have a shared struggle and a shared benefit, which is dyslexia.
Absolutely. No, that's great. And now the schools and, the homeschooling and the families and all that, they're across the world, I would assume.
They are. And that's a really cool thing, because I'll have a team where I'll have a kid from somewhere in the United States, let's say California. I'll have a kid from Toronto in Canada. I'll have a kid from Zimbabwe, and then I have a kid from Germany.
It's amazing.
It's so awesome.
Oh, it must be the coolest thing. And you're based in Boston, so, there's the Boston, and you see this other world, quote unquote. So one of the things that, obviously, as we're talking about, and that you're, NoticeAbility preaches to and so forth, is the neuroscience behind dyslexia. And one of the things that you, one way you got into this was by reading The Dyslexic Advantage by Frenette and Bragonier. Why and how did you, decide to look at the neuroscience behind dyslexia?
Yeah, that book was very impactful, and I think that what the authors did so brilliantly is they actually combined. They are neuroscientists. They combined the neuroscience with a tremendous amount of anecdotal research from hundreds, if not thousands, of interviews with people with dyslexia. And I think what's so fascinating is that in our country we tend to be quite science oriented. We tend to almost disregard anecdotal data because it's not quantifiable, blah, blah, blah. But what I think they did is they brought a very human experience to with the backdrop of a neuroscientific explanation. And so what you get is you get sort of the two components that I think make for a very compelling presentation or argument around the dyslexic potential. So I am not a neuroscientist. I'm not even a traditional educator by any stretch of the imagination. So what I get to say when I begin to talk is this is not what I am. What I am is a 47-year-old dyslexia who's been married to a dyslexic for 20 years, who has a son who's 13 with dyslexia, who was the son of a person now deceased, father with dyslexia. So I've basically got like 100 years worth of living with dyslexia experience. That's my qualification. But I get to cherry pick off the other work of these other people, because everybody wants to hear, well, what's the neuroscience, or what's the behavioral psychological evidence or methodology behind it. So, oh, great, I'm going to build curriculum that I know students with dyslexia want, because it's what I didn't have that I wished I wanted. But what we do is we inject all of these other professionals, all these experts into that equation to bolster the framework. And so it's cool. I get to speak with, yourself included, with some really fascinating people. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And especially, I have a question at the end that we'll get into this, but it's also really cool that, you're married to Sally Taylor, who also has dyslexia, and you have a son who has dyslexia. So it brings it all back home, because when you do your work, you're involved in this whole way, but then like to come back home and still have an environment or space where you can really, talk, you can, you can see it also like from a family like perspective. It's wonderful. I think it's great. So in terms of what was I going to say? So, okay, so you obviously do all these programs and talking about neuroscience and everything. Where would you like to see, your curriculums and the research in neuroscience go, if anywhere, in the next, say, 5 years?
Yeah, where would I like my curriculum to go in the next 5 years?
Well, I'm just talking about like your goals. So and we can start with the curriculum and then we can actually get into the neuroscience, or vice versa, or what you see advancing in the, neuroscience. What would you like to see, I guess, overall?
Yeah, well, from a neuroscientific perspective, there's some tremendous work being done. A woman named Nadine Gabb here in Boston. There are many, many others who are trying to tackle the most critical part of the neuroscientific aspect of dyslexia, which is diagnosis. Early recognition of the struggle, and then early remediation allows the individual to have an opportunity, based on the neuroplasticity of the brain, to actually acquire this learned skill of reading more efficiently. So the younger a child is diagnosed and the earlier they get that remediation, the more likely they will develop into being a competent and a confident reader. So the neuroscience is really focused, I think, on early diagnosis and early intervention, which I applaud. Is fantastic. As for what we do and how I see us progressing over the next 5-10 years, is that we, even under the best case scenario where you have early intervention, early remediation, the amount of time it will take for those practices to trickle down into every classroom in America and overseas is going to take, 10, 15, maybe 20, 25 years, right? Which means that we've got students going through the classroom every single day who are not getting what they need and emerging insecure, self-doubting human beings. That's where I feel like we can act now through the distribution of our content to start to increase self-esteem, academic tenacity, and make kids aware of the stigma that they place on themselves or that others place on them. What has been the most exciting part of noticeability in the last couple of years is the fact that we have been approached by nonprofit organizations from around the world who want to take what we've created and translate it into foreign languages and distribute it in those countries. So our first partner was a foundation out of the Netherlands who translated our content into Dutch. Second one was an organization in Brazil that translated our content into Portuguese. Now we're working on Mandarin, Cantonese. There's a possibility we might do Persian, and there's a possibility we might do Polish. And the ability to know that there are, or the possibility of knowing that there are is a small legion of empowered dyslexic students that are getting this balanced approach to their dyslexic understanding and are becoming empowered to realize their true potential, not only in the United States but overseas, gives me hope that the field of dyslexia is running two parallel paths. The first is that neuroscientific one, and the second one is creating a bunch of advocates who understand their dyslexia and who can help address the misconception or the misperception in society of what dyslexia is. And so if you those two paths running parallel to each other, then I think, yeah, in 20, 25 years, dyslexia, my ultimate dream is for people with dyslexia to want to put their diagnosis at the top of their resume because employers finally realize that it's a competitive advantage.
Absolutely.
It's a very different reality than we're in right now.
So you're a father to a son with dyslexia. How do you incorporate, with what you do and your learned experiences into your son's education and learning?
Yeah, so much of, having had the good fortune to have a successful academic career as a student with dyslexia, I'm able to sort of condense a lot of the tricks of the trade, a lot of the efficiencies that I had to adopt to survive and to thrive academically. I now have a pretty concise methodology that I can impart to my son. And we're homeschooling right now for a variety of reasons, the pandemic being one of them. But the idea is that I don't want to say they're cheat sheets because cheat insinuates something that you're doing something let's call them academic hacks. Okay, I'm just teaching him these really quick sort of condensed tools to get through academics in a really successful and productive way that reduce the anxiety and yield higher results. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. Thank God I have the opportunity to guide him through this process right now, because if he was off in a classroom, he would be having to find these solutions on his own. It takes longer, it's more frustrating. So, it's that goes back to the shared experience of struggle that we, there's nobody on earth who hasn't experienced struggle. The idea of what did you learn from it, and then can you somehow package and contextualize that and share it with people who are going through the same struggle. So,
and how is he doing? He's in, he's 12, 13, 7th grade, if I had to guess, or 6th, 7th.
Exactly.
Okay, technically, I know you're homeschooling, but, and how is he doing? How does he take all of these different tools and, apply them? Does he also feel like he's succeeding? Because being a kid, it can be very frustrating, having all these challenges.
Yeah, I mean, at the age of 12, 13 years old, that's when the last thing you want to do is be hearing from your parents how to do well in school, right?
I get it, especially with homeschool. I get it totally.
But I think that he and I have established over the years that you know eh, I've got some good things that I can share with him.
Of course.
I try to do my best to identify his very understandable frustration when, I mean, there's nothing about school that is particularly exciting for a student with dyslexia.
Oh, no,
It's
not
something
at all.
you gotta do, right?
Right.
And so I think that, yeah, I mean, of course, father son, we have flare ups from time to
Of course,
time, but the
absolutely.
is that he happens to be a very coachable kid.
That's great.
Like he's receptive to instruction, especially when he sees what he can get out of it.
Right.
And so I think it's actually translating pretty nicely.
That's wonderful, and I'm sure it will continue. What advice would you give parents who have children with dyslexia?
Your child will show you what they are passionate about. Supporting that passion allows them to derive a sense of purpose and to become extremely knowledgeable about that particular drive or passion. And when they become so knowledgeable and experts, if you will, in that particular passion, asking them about it, becoming the student of your child, and allowing them to share their knowledge allows them to understand that they are fully capable of learning, that they are fully deserving of your time and attention and respect, and most specifically is going to combat what they're getting on a daily basis, which is being in an environment where they're uninspired and where they're experiencing defeat and where that's the classroom for them. Creating an environment at home where you can applaud and celebrate what they find of interest is going to translate to a greater sense of their own efficacy and confidence. Now, obviously, within reason, a lot of one thing that I often get is from parents is, a child with dyslexia will sometimes escape into gaming. And I'm not a huge fan of gaming because I see it as a form of possibly self-medication if it's abused, if it goes from recreational into habitual.
What do you mean by gaming? You mean in terms of games like video games and that type of stuff? Okay.
Video games. No, I'm not talking about physical athletics. So that's a whole.
No. I figured that. Yeah.
Yeah, gaming is. I can't get them off of the gaming console. Well, actually, behind gaming is a whole world of software engineering and coding, right? And the dyslexic is who resonates with gaming, and we know that the dyslexic strong suits present themselves particularly well in software coding. Why, as parents, can't we find an online software coding camp or a local one when the world returns to some sort of normalcy and say, great, you love gaming? Why don't you learn to write games? And by the way, software engineering is a fantastic professional pursuit. And there's all sorts of technical colleges that allow you to focus on these sort of things. So if we can take that passion that at first glance seems like, it's not really productive, and find what behind it we can encourage them to pursue and find strength from, then you're taking something that might be on the verge of self-medicating in a negative way to being a path of passion. That's an extreme example. But if the kid is like a Lego master and he's building these structures, okay, that's architecture. That's a form of engineering. Mm-hmm. Let's see what's behind it and feed those passions.
I think that's great advice. Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was lovely.